Today, the committee will discuss President-elect Trump's announced goal of mass deportation of undocumented immigrants from communities across the country. 13 million undocumented immigrants live in our country. Most have been here for a long period of time. They are healthcare workers, teachers, farm workers, small business owners. They pay taxes, nearly $50 billion a year, they did in 2022. And many, like one of our witnesses today, grew up alongside our children and grandchildren with the same dreams of a first job, a driver's license, and college acceptance. Let's get down to the bottom line. I hope we can all agree that any undocumented immigrant found guilty of a serious crime should not be allowed to stay here, or if we have knowledge, they should not be allowed to come into this country, period. Ms. Morin, I read your testimony this morning, touched my heart. Your loss of your daughter, I know you'll talk about at some length. That is a tragedy which we all lament and look on with sadness. And we don't want to allow that kind of individual who damaged your family so terribly in this country in the first place, period. In his first term, President Trump deported dreamers who came to the U.S. as children. He deported veterans who had served our nation. He deported essential workers who care for our families, build our homes, and make sure we have food on the table in the morning. It was an undocumented worker who was watching your grandchild this morning at the daycare center. Undocumented worker who walked carefully with your mother back to her room after breakfast so she didn't fall down. It was an undocumented worker with that leaf blower in your front yard over the weekend. Now, President-elect Trump has pledged that on the first day of his new administration, he will declare a national emergency and use our military as part of a mass deportation plan. I've made a living out of politics, as have my colleagues at the table here. During the course of the campaign, you can make promises. Sometimes they come true and sometimes they don't. The notion of Mexico building a wall on our southern border was repeated over and over again. It didn't happen. There was an extension of the wall on our border, but Mexico didn't pay for it. Things change when you go from high-flying campaign rhetoric to ground. Think about for a moment using our military for a mass deportation plan. I'm sure it would have a damaging impact on the morale of the troops, rounding up people in their own communities at a time when we're already facing the most serious recruitment challenge in years. Listen to the words of Stephen Miller, who now has been promoted to a higher level position, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy for incoming President Trump. Here's what Stephen Miller said. In terms of personnel, you go to the red state governors and you say, give us your National Guard. We will deputize them as immigration enforcement officers. And if you're going to go into an unfriendly state like Maryland, Stephen Miller said, well, there would just be Virginia doing the arrests in Maryland, right? Very close, very nearby. Almost a nonchalant attitude toward the notion of sending National Guard from one state to the other to end up sending people out of this country. In addition to weakening our military, it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars to deport every undocumented immigrant in our country. It would damage our economy and separate American families. Instead, we should focus on deporting those who are truly a danger to America, and we should give the rest a chance to earn legal status. They would have to register with the government, certainly pay their taxes, and submit to serious background checks. Most Americans, nearly 2 out of 3, agree we should give lawful status to undocumented immigrants who don't pose a threat to our country. That's what we did in 2013. A bipartisan group of 8 senators, including myself and Ranking Member Graham, drafted a bill to reform our immigration laws and secure our border. 2013 it was. That bill passed the Senate 68-32. Unfortunately, it wasn't taken up by the House of Representatives and the Republican majority. The notion behind that was that everyone would be under requirement to come forward and identify themselves to the government. all the undocumented people in this country. And if they identified themselves, went through a background check, paid their taxes, they could continue to live and work here without fear of deportation. In fact, in our bill, over a long period of time, and a really long period of time, they could be on a path to legality and citizenship. That's a starting point that I think makes sense. Not mass deportation, but mass accountability, so we know who's here. And how would it make a difference? We would go to E-Verify to make sure that if you didn't go through that process in our bill, you couldn't legally work in the United States. So there was an enforcement. It was serious. I'm glad I was part of that effort, and I hope we can return to the discussion. Over the weekend, President-elect Trump, I watched his interview on Meet the Press. He said some positive things from my point of view. And he really challenged us on the Democratic side to work with him when it came to the Dreamers. I accept the challenge. Name the time and place, Mr. President. I'll be there. The reality is that Congress, for almost 40 years, has failed to fix our broken immigration system. We've had opportunities to do it. I hope we can find more in the future. We should use our 2013 immigration bill as a starting point instead of mass deportations, as I said, mass accountability. Let's fix our broken immigration system in a way that protects our country and honors our heritage as a nation of immigrants. Now I recognize Senator Graham.